The sound of a chainsaw cutting wood at dawn was what finally made me run out of the house that Sunday. There they were, 3 unknown men building a floating dock on my lake. Yes, you heard that right. A dock on the lake that my grandfather bought almost 6 decades ago, and that now legally belongs to me. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Excuse me, but what are you doing on my property? I asked, trying to stay calm while my heart raced. One of the men stopped, looked at me confused and said, "Property? We're building the new community pier for Lake Vista Estates." Karen said everything was authorized. That was the exact moment when I realized that my quiet lakeside life was about to turn into a battlefield. I inherited this 25-acre property with a beautiful lake from my grandfather when he passed away at 92. This place had always been our family retreat. I grew up fishing in these waters, playing among century-old trees. And now, at 34, I consider this land my greatest treasure. For generations, our family was the only one around for miles. At least until 2 years ago, when they started building the luxury condominium Lake Vista Estates on the neighboring property. At first, I didn't mind. Real estate development is inevitable in this rapidly appreciating mountain region. Real estate agents had already offered me tempting sums for the property, but I always refused. How could I sell something so valuable to my family history? The first hints of trouble appeared when I got a sales flyer for Lake Vista Estates in my mailbox. On the cover, there was an impressive photo of my lake with the phrase, "Enjoy exclusive water activities in our stunning natural lake." I was intrigued, but not alarmed. Maybe it was just a mistake or a promotional photo from somewhere else. Unfortunately, I was wrong. In the following weeks, I began noticing strangers parking their cars near my entrance and walking straight to the lake. Families having picnics on the shore, people fishing, even swimming. When I politely informed them that they were on private property, many replied with variations of the same phrase. The Homeowners Association said the lake is for everyone. I put up private property and no trespassing signs all around the perimeter. They mysteriously disappeared overnight. I installed new, bigger, and more visible ones. These were then vandalized with spray paint. That's when I decided to confront the infamous Karen the dock workers had mentioned. Karen Blackwell, president of the Lake Vista Estates Homeowners Association, a 45-year-old woman with a haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and a smile that never reached her eyes. I scheduled a formal meeting with her at the association's office. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, coffee in hand, without even apologizing. "Mr. Miller, I understand your concern, but that lake has been used by the local community for generations," she stated with fake sympathy. "With all due respect, Mrs. Blackwell, that's simply not true. I have all the deeds and documents proving the lake has been my family's private property for almost 60 years, I replied, showing copies of the documents. She just smiled as she slid the documents back to me without even looking at them. Things change. This condominium brought development and appreciation to the whole region. Our residents invested millions believing they had access to the lake. Do you really want to be the villain denying the community that natural resource? That was when I realized that this wouldn't be a rational conversation. Karen wasn't interested in facts or property rights. She had packaged access to my lake as a condominium amenity, and now she needed to uphold that promise, regardless of the law. I left that meeting knowing the battle was just beginning. What I didn't imagine was how far Karen would be willing to go to take what didn't belong to her. The situation got completely out of control during a weekend I spent visiting my sister in another state. I came back to find my backyard turned into a kind of makeshift beach club. There were about 20 people scattered along the lakeshore, some in beach chairs, others swimming, and a group of teenagers jumping off an old oak straight into the water. Loud music was playing from a portable speaker. Beer cans and food wrappers were everywhere. I froze for a moment, feeling a mix of shock and rage growing inside me. This was my private property, my sanctuary, being treated like a public park. "Excuse me, this is private property. I need everyone to leave immediately," I shouted, walking toward the nearest group. A middle-aged woman looked up at me over her sunglasses. "Ah, you must be the grumpy guy who keeps putting up those ridiculous signs. Karen assured us we have every right to be here." "No, you don't. This lake belongs to my family. It's on the property documents, and you're all trespassing right now," I replied, keeping my voice firm despite my rising anger. A burly man got up from his chair. "Hey man, we paid a lot for our home specifically for access to this lake. If you've got a problem, sort it out with the association. Until then, we're going to keep enjoying what was promised." I realized arguing would be pointless. These people truly believed they were entitled to my lake. The situation was far more serious than I'd thought. Karen had spun an entirely false story, and these residents were both victims and intruders. "I will call the police if you don't leave in 15 minutes, I warned, pulling out my cell phone. Some people started gathering their things, looking uncomfortable, but most stayed, with some even deliberately turning their backs on me. I called the police, and they arrived after almost an hour. The officers seemed reluctant to get involved in what they called a neighbor's dispute, but after checking my property documents, they politely asked the intruders to leave. Reluctantly, the group began to disperse, some casting furious looks while others muttered insults. One of the teenagers, as he left, shouted, "We'll be back anyway, old miser. This lake should belong to everyone." After everyone left, I was left alone staring at the trash scattered around, tire marks on my meticulously maintained lawn, and a feeling of violation I couldn't shake off. What was supposed to be a peaceful return home had turned into a nightmare. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how many times this must have happened during my absence. I thought about my grandfather, how he cared for this place with so much love, and how devastated he'd be to see what was happening. Something had to be done. Something more definitive than just putting up signs or making occasional calls to the police. The next morning, Karen Blackwell showed up at my door. Unsurprisingly, she wasn't there to apologize. "Mr. Miller, some of our residents informed me about your hostile behavior yesterday," she began, as if I were the one at fault. "Hostile? Mrs. Blackwell, I found dozens of people trespassing on my property, leaving trash everywhere and damaging my lawn. As president of the association, you're responsible for encouraging this invasion," I replied. Karen adjusted her posture, crossing her arms. "Let's set a few things straight. This lake has historically been a shared resource in this area. The oldest city maps don't even show property lines crossing the lake. We firmly believe you don't have exclusive rights to this water." "That's absolutely false," I said, feeling my face heat up. "I have all the documents proving the entire lake is within my property, legally acquired by my grandfather nearly 6 decades ago. If you keep spreading that false information, I'll be talking to a lawyer." Her smile faded for a moment before returning, even more fake than before. "Well, that would be unfortunate. Lawsuits are expensive, time-consuming, and I'm sure someone with more modest resources than you would prefer an amicable solution. Our association represents over 50 upscale residences. Do you really want to go down this road?" It was a veiled threat. She was implying that I wouldn't have the resources to take on the association in court. What she didn't know was that underestimating your opponent is the biggest mistake you can make. "If that's what you want, I'm looking forward to settling this legally," I replied calmly. "And until a judge rules otherwise, I'll keep defending my property against intruders. Good day, Mrs. Blackwell." I closed the door, my mind made up. As soon as she left, I called 3 lawyers who specialized in real estate law. The next day, 2 events shocked me completely. The first was finding out that someone had cut down all my private property signs overnight. The second, much more alarming, was an email sent to all the residents of Lake Vista Estates that a concerned homeowner forwarded to me. In the email, Karen informed the residents that I was trying to claim the historically communal lake, and suggested that they continue to exercise their guaranteed access rights in the purchase contracts. She even went so far as to say that my signs were being removed because they violated municipal signage regulations. A blatant lie. I printed the email and took it straight to the office of Richard Roberts, a 51-year-old lawyer recommended by a friend. Richard reviewed all my documents carefully. "This is pretty clear," he said after his analysis. "Your grandfather bought the property with the lake included. All taxes were paid correctly and every transfer was properly registered. There's no legal ambiguity here. What the association is doing is, frankly, organized property invasion." "And what about her claim regarding those old maps?" I asked. Richard smiled. "I can look into that, but even if such maps existed, they'd be irrelevant. The current legal documents are what matter, and they unequivocally support you. What worries me more is this email," he said, pointing to the printed message. "Mrs. Blackwell is knowingly deceiving the buyers. If she included lake access in the sales contracts, she could be committing real estate fraud." I left the office feeling validated, yet worried. Richard warned me that the process could drag on for months, and that the association might make my life very difficult during that time. He wasn't wrong. The following week, the situation worsened dramatically. A group of teenagers from the condominium started meeting at night near the lake, leaving broken bottles on the shore. My kayak was found overturned in the morning, with scratches on the hull. Messages like "share the lake" along with some swear words were spray painted on the trees near the water. I installed security cameras around the property, which only served to further enrage the intruders. One of the cameras was stolen on the first night, but not before it captured clear images of the culprits. 3 teenagers I recognized from the previous incident, children of condominium owners. I took the footage to the police, who finally began taking the case seriously. An officer visited the families of the teenagers, and for a few days, there was a tense truce. That's when I received a formal letter from the Homeowners Association. It wasn't an invitation to negotiate, but legal intimidation disguised as a notice. They claimed that my hostile behavior against the community and the unauthorized installation of surveillance equipment pointed at other people's property violated municipal ordinances. Richard advised me not to respond directly and focused on preparing our lawsuit. He hired a surveyor to reconfirm the exact boundaries of my property and filed for an injunction to keep the association's members from accessing the lake while the case was pending. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. On the eve of the hearing, something unexpected happened. A man showed up at my door, Tom Ferguson, one of the first buyers of Lake Vista Estates. "Sorry to bother you," he said, looking genuinely embarrassed, "but I think you should see this." Tom showed me his purchase contract, and indeed, there was a specific clause mentioning unrestricted access to the adjacent natural lake as one of the premium amenities of the condominium. More importantly, he showed text messages between him and Karen from before the purchase, where he specifically asked if the lake was part of the condominium property. Her response had been calculatedly ambiguous. The lake is a natural feature of the area that our residents can fully enjoy. It wasn't technically a lie, but it was clearly meant to mislead. "We paid an extra $80,000 for the premium lake access," Tom explained. "But yesterday, when we learned about the lawsuit, Karen admitted in a closed meeting that she always knew the lake was private property. She said she was negotiating to gain access, but many of us felt we were deceived." Tom wasn't the only one. In the following 48 hours, 5 other owners contacted me with similar stories. Richard was thrilled. We had clear evidence of prior knowledge and possible fraud. On the day of the hearing, the judge examined the documents from both sides. The association's lawyer tried to argue about historical use and prescriptive easement, but he didn't have any documentation to back those claims. Karen's text messages and the testimonies of the misled buyers were especially damaging to her case. The judge granted the injunction in my favor, prohibiting any unauthorized access to the lake until the case was resolved. In addition, he ordered the association to send out a formal correction to all the residents, clarifying that the lake was private property. I left the courtroom feeling vindicated, though I knew the main battle was yet to come. Karen gave me a look of pure hatred as she passed down the hallway. "This isn't over," she murmured, loud enough only for me to hear. She was right, but not in the way she imagined. What started as a dispute over a lake was about to expose a much larger scheme of questionable business practices in Lake Vista Estates. And I, the lonely neighbor she thought she could easily intimidate, was about to become her worst nightmare. With the injunction in place and the main case moving forward, I decided I needed a more permanent solution to protect my property. After consulting Richard and researching local regulations, I hired a company to install a living fence along the entire border with Lake Vista Estates. I chose evergreen shrubs that would grow to form an almost 2-meter-high, impenetrable natural barrier. It was aesthetically pleasing, yet sent a clear message. This is the limit. The installation started on a sunny Monday morning, with an efficient team methodically working along the perimeter. On the morning of the second day, Karen showed up accompanied by 2 members of the board and a man who introduced himself as a municipal inspector. "This fence violates several zoning regulations," she declared triumphantly. "Mr. Daniels here just issued a stop work order." The inspector looked uncomfortable with her categorical statement. "Actually, I'm here to check if the specifications comply with the municipal code. Living fences are perfectly legal as long as they maintain certain setbacks from the property line." The installation supervisor promptly showed the plans, proving that the fence was being planted well within my property and meeting all legal requirements. The inspector nodded, made a few notes, and informed Karen that there was no basis for stopping the work. "This is ridiculous," she protested. "This fence clearly is meant to be hostile and ruin the visual harmony of the community." "Ma'am," the inspector replied patiently, "property owners have the right to demarcate their properties according to regulations, and this project is following them." Karen left fuming, but her plan to stop the fence had failed. Within a week, the installation was complete. a beautiful green barrier that surrounded my property, with a single locked gate for my exclusive access. For now, the shrubs were still relatively short, but they would grow quickly. Meanwhile, the main case continued progressing, with Richard gathering more and more evidence. Through subpoenas, we obtained internal emails from the sales office of Lake Vista Estates, showing that the team was fully aware the lake was private property. One particularly incriminating email from Karen to the marketing director stated, "Don't worry about the lake. Keep using it in the promotional photos. The owner is young and inexperienced. We'll settle it once the sales are done." At the same time, my green fence began to become a symbol in the community. Some condominium residents, especially those who felt duped by the association, discreetly supported me when we crossed paths in town. Tom Ferguson and other buyers who had opposed Karen's tactics were occasionally invited for fishing trips or barbecues on my property, by formal invitation, of course. A few months later, we received shocking news. The association's lawyer contacted me proposing a settlement. Richard explained that they had probably realized how weak their position was. They're offering $50,000 in compensation for the inconvenience, and they promised to stop promoting the lake as an amenity, Richard explained. In return, they want you to grant controlled access to the lake for community events 3 times a year. I immediately refused. After everything they've done, invading my property, vandalizing my things, trying to intimidate me, I'm not interested in half measures. Richard smiled. I knew you'd probably say that. In fact, I believe we can get a lot more. Let's counter-propose. Our counter-proposal was bold. $250,000 in compensation for the damages already caused, public acknowledgement that the lake is private property, and coverage of all legal expenses. No access to the lake at all. The response came quickly. A total refusal and threats to drag the case out indefinitely. Exactly as we expected, said Richard. Now we're going for the jugular. The following week, we filed a petition to include evidence of potential real estate fraud in the case, something that could even trigger a criminal investigation. At the same time, the misled residents, led by Tom, filed a class action lawsuit against the association. The effect was immediate. The builder of Lake Vista Estates, fearing damage to their reputation, intervened. In less than 2 weeks, we received a new settlement proposal much closer to what we had requested. $200,000 in compensation, full coverage of legal expenses, a formal retraction, and a guarantee that all promotional materials would be corrected. Richard advised me to accept. This is a clear win, and prevents dragging this out for years. Plus, the misled buyers can still pursue their lawsuit independently. I accepted the settlement. The day after signing, I received an unexpected call from Samuel Jacobs, a condominium resident whom I only knew by sight. "I just heard you accepted the settlement," he said. "I wanted to let you know that Karen Blackwell resigned from the association yesterday. I was elected interim president, and my first action is to fix the damage she did. I'd like to meet with you and discuss how we can be better neighbors from now on." Yeah, I agreed to meet, still cautious but willing to try for a more civilized relationship. Samuel was sincere and straightforward. "Many of us bought here for the natural setting, not to create conflicts with our neighbors," he explained during our coffee. "What Karen did was unethical and harmful for everyone. I'm sorry for what you went through." In the months that followed, things changed drastically. My green fence grew strong and healthy, becoming not only a physical barrier but a symbol of my endurance. Part of the settlement money was invested in property improvements, including a more advanced security system and the restoration of parts of the lake affected by the misuse. The class action lawsuit by the buyers against the association and the builder continued, but I was no longer directly involved. I later learned that many received significant discounts on the homes they paid for as compensation for the lake access that had been falsely promised. Karen Blackwell faced consequences beyond her resignation. Her reputation in the community was irreparably damaged, and I heard rumors that her real estate brokerage lost several major clients after the scandal. I occasionally saw her in town, and she always made sure to avoid crossing my path. 8 months after the case was resolved, my life had returned to the calm I'd always wanted. On a Saturday afternoon, while I was peacefully fishing off my rebuilt dock, I saw Samuel and his family walking along the public trail surrounding the condominium. He waved politely. I waved back. It was just the kind of interaction I preferred with most of the residents of Lake Vista Estates. However, there were exceptions. Tom Ferguson and a few others who had stood against Karen's tactics from the start were occasionally invited to fish or have a barbecue on my property, by formal invitation, of course. During one of those gatherings, Tom confided in me an interesting piece of information. Did you know the association is planning to build its own artificial lake now? Much smaller than yours, of course, but at least it'll truly be theirs. I laughed at the irony. The whole conflict could have been avoided if they had taken that route from the beginning, instead of trying to take what wasn't theirs. Real estate appreciation in the region continued to accelerate. I received an offer to sell my property for nearly 3 times what it was appraised at before the conflict. I refused without hesitation. Some things simply have no price. My grandfather's legacy, the natural beauty of the lake, and the satisfaction of defending what's rightfully mine. My green fence grew lush, creating a living boundary between my property and the condominium. In a way, it perfectly represented the lesson I learned throughout this experience. Clear boundaries make for good neighbors. Those who respect them are welcome to a cordial relationship. For everyone else, the barrier serves as a constant reminder. Samuel kept his word about promoting more respectful relations. The new board of the association issued regular communications reminding residents that the lake was private property and should not be used without an invitation. The trespassing incidents completely ceased. On the rare occasions when I met a younger resident who didn't know the story, I sometimes heard comments about the lake that could be everyone's. In those moments, I just smiled politely. They didn't know about the sleepless nights, the threats, and the exhausting legal battle. They didn't know that every inch of that green fence represented a victory for not only preserving my property, but also for protecting the family legacy entrusted to me. One afternoon, while I was walking along the fence, I noticed a discreet sign that the association had installed on the public trail. View of the private lake. Please respect the property boundaries. It was small, yet significant. A belated but permanent acknowledgement of how this story ended. Richard called me that week with news about the buyer's class action lawsuit. They accepted a substantial settlement, he said. The builder had to buy back some homes for 90% of what was paid and compensate the others. Karen is now facing an investigation by the real estate board. Poetic justice, I commented. Justice delayed is justice denied, Richard replied in his characteristically formal way. Then added, but in this case, justice has arrived, and with interest. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Watching the sunset reflected on the calm waters of my lake that night, I felt a deep peace. The battle had been tough, but necessary. Some people only learn to respect boundaries when they're forced to. And what about my green fence? It keeps growing, strong and vigorous, just like my determination to protect what's rightfully mine.